All right. Hey, how are you guys doing? You guys doing good? Man, I am ready to have a good time with you guys today. Did you guys have a good day? How was school? Man, just school, right, guys? All of you? You just love it so much? Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to jump in today. I was watching a movie recently, and it was about a prince. So, however you feel about princes, I'm not sure what your personal opinion on princes are, but it was a movie about a prince, and he kind of had a rough upbringing. He had a very big family, and he was the youngest in all of his family. Do we have some people in here who are the youngest of all of their family? So a couple of y'all, maybe you feel like, man, it's just like I get overlooked. No one cares about me. Like you have some of these feelings. So he was feeling some of these same feelings that maybe you have felt, like they cared more about his siblings than they did him, that he was the least of his family's priorities. And so all of these things, he begins dealing with it. And as he grows up, he makes the decision, hey, I need to leave and go do something for myself if I'm going to achieve anything, if I'm going to reach my goals, reach my dreams. So he leaves his family and he goes off and he meets a girl, right? This is the beginning of every good story. He meets a girl who is a princess and they hit it off and they fall in love, right? I bet you guys did not see that coming, right? So he meets her, they fall in love, but you see, she had a very similar situation. Her family was very dysfunctional. Her parents died when she was young, and her sister, helped raise her, but there was just a lot of dysfunction in there. And so when it came to this moment of them telling her family what they wanted to do, a conflict broke out, and because of this conflict, her only sister left. And so what does our prince, what does our hero do? He tries to find her, absolutely. He's the hero. He's going to go save her. He's going to go rescue her. He's going to reunite the family. He's going to bring her back because that's what princes do. And so he goes, and in the process of this, his love, his sweetheart, his old lady gets hurt, and hurt badly to the point where she is about to die. And it's this critical moment of the movie. And as the scene is taking place, he finds out that the only thing that can help her is him. The only thing that can help her is an act of true love. And as he leans in, he says, "Oh, Anna, if only there was someone out there who loved you." And this is the moment that we knew that Prince Hans was a liar, right? This is the moment, because we were on the team with Prince. We were on Team Hans, right? He was the good guy. He looked the part. He did everything right. And then we find out that he is a liar and he tricked everyone. And this is the point where that happens. And he leaves her to die, and he goes off to take all of her power, to take all of her authority, to use it for himself. And you're just completely blindsided. I'm still having to see someone to work through how that left me, the traumatic experience that was. But this guy that you thought was nice, this guy that you thought that was great, this guy you were rooting for, we were rooting for them as a celebrity couple, Anna and Hans, Team Hans, right? We were rooting for them. We wanted them to make it. We wanted it to work out. And here's what we learn in this story. And it's true for them, and it's true for us as well. They will always be people whose position of power is greater than the content of their character. There will always be people whose position of power is greater than their content of character. And that's exactly what happened. He looked the part. We thought he was great. We thought he was a Prince Charming, but he turned out not to be that at all. And as we are going through our discussion in our series about what God's kingdom is supposed to look like, what power and authority is supposed to look like, and what God has called us to, the question comes up, what do you do when you find yourself under bad authority? What do you do when you find yourself under an authority of maybe someone who is lazy and tries to get you to do everything for them? What do you do when you find yourself under an authority that disrespects you, that has wronged you? What do you do when you find yourself under an authority that has lied and tried to manipulate you? what do you do? Let's take it one step further. What do you do with a figure of authority, a person in position of power who says they follow Jesus, who says they are a Christian, but none of their actions look like it? And so that is where we're going to be digging in today, because the reality is that will probably happen to you at some point. You will be under the authority of someone who maybe has hurt you, who has lied to you, who you don't trust. And the question is we're learning about authority, and we're learning, last week about all these things that God has called us to do, but what are we supposed to do if we find ourselves in that situation? And so we're going to be looking at the story of David and Saul. If you remember, we actually talked about their story a little bit a couple of weeks ago. David was the harp-playing shepherd, right? And he didn't look the part, he didn't act the part, but he was the harp-playing shepherd in the field. And then King Saul was the king. He was the awesome guy. And what you see is that God actually chose David to be the king because of Saul's actions, because of Saul's disobedience. But he puts David in this position serving under Saul, under this unfair, unjust, sinful, wicked king, to the point that as David is being obedient, God is blessing him, right? He kills Goliath. He's doing all of these deeds, and people are beginning to celebrate him, and they're singing songs about him, and Saul hears about this, and maybe you remember we talked about this a little bit. His solution to the David problem is to kill David. And so David has to leave his family, David has to leave his friends, David has to leave his home and go on the run just to survive. And that's where we're going to pick up their story today in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Verse 1 through 3, if you want to join us, there's some Bibles in your seats, and it's also up on the screen. It says, when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the Wild Goats Rock. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, and there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost part of the cave. So we actually talked about this part of the story a couple of weeks ago. David is on the run, and he is running and hiding from place to place, running and hiding from cave to cave, just to survive. And Saul is on the hunt, chasing after him. And in this irony, this turn of events, Saul decides to take a break to go use the bathroom in the cave that David and all of his closest friends are hiding in to be safe. And it's almost like, God has a sense of humor, because you're looking at this and you're watching this unfold. I want you to just put yourself in like David and his men's shoes. You're hiding in this cave, and the person who tries to kill you, who has chased you down, who has caused you to leave your family and your friends, wanders into your cave to use the bathroom. Right? He finds himself in a position of compromise and vulnerability, and it just seems like maybe this is David's moment. Maybe this is David's moment to get him. Maybe this is David's moment to get back at him. I'm going to pick up the story in verse 4. It says, and the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And so it's David's chance, right? This is his chance to kill Saul. This is his chance to go back to his family. I'm not sure if you've ever watched a movie or been a part of a people who are getting ready for a fight or a big event. All of David's boys are hyping him up. They're like, yeah, David, you got this, David. We're going to go get him. They're not even fighting, but they're like, we got this. We're going to go show Saul what's up. And they are getting pumped up, and they're like, David, this is your chance. And so David's listening to that. He's thinking, hey, man, this is going to solve all my problems. I'm going to go home. I'm going to see my family. I'm going to see my wife. I'm going to see my kids. And all my problems will be solved. And in this moment, David decides to do something different. Because in all reality, he had the ability to go kill Saul. He killed Goliath. He cut off Goliath's head, but instead of cutting off Saul's head in a sign of authority, he cut off the edge of his robe. And some things to understand about the robe. This robe signified Saul's role as king. It would have been made for him for that position. When people saw him wearing that robe, they would have known, hey, this is Saul. He is the king of Israel. And I think what David is trying to show him here, and so follow me for a second. He is trying to show him that he is not going to use his power and authority to take advantage of Saul in a compromised and vulnerable position, because that's what Saul would have done. He's saying, hey, I'm doing something different. I'm trying to be something different. We see it pick up in the next verse. In verse 24, verse 8, it says, afterwards, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, my lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, behold, David seeks your harm? And so a couple of things here. So he cuts off the edge of the robe. Saul leaves unaware that anything had even happened. And David exits the cave and shouts after Saul, my lord the king. And Saul begins to come back, and we see something here, just who David was as a person, how he operated. Regardless of what had happened to him, he was still going to honor the position that Saul had. Just because of Saul's actions, he hadn't stopped being king. Just because of Saul's actions, he hadn't left the throne. And so the first thing that David is going to do is honor his position. He didn't start calling him names. He didn't say, hey, King Poo-Poo Head. Right? He said, hey, my Lord the King. And he bowed down and showed him respect and honor. And, you know, it's interesting because David didn't know how this was going to go. There's a very real scenario where he could have said, my Lord the King, and bowed down, and Saul came back and just killed him right then. That's what he'd been on the run for this entire time. And the second thing that you see that David did, so he honored his position, he trusted God, he didn't know what was going to happen, but then he points out who Saul has been listening to. He says, who told you that I'm trying to kill you? One of the things you'll begin to realize as you go through life, you engage with people and authority, those who operate poorly in their power and position usually have unwise and untruthful people around them. Those who operate poorly in their leadership and their position and their power usually have unwise and untruthful people around them. And what you're seeing here is David saying, hey, who are you listening to? Who are the voices that you have allowed in your life because someone is telling you something that's not true and you're basing a whole lot of stuff just on that? And so I think this is a good thing for us to realize, for us to see and hear, for us to evaluate who are the voices that we have let into our lives. Is this someone that I trust? Is this someone who's living their life in a way that I would want to follow them, that I see the things that they're doing and saying, hey, I want to be a part of that? Or are you letting voices into your life to give you advice and influence you, and their whole lives are falling apart? Whose voices are you listening to? The reality of this situation is if Saul would have had better voices around him, this situation might have never happened. If Saul would have had voices around him saying, hey man, why are you trying to kill David? What did he do wrong? If he had people that he let into his life to say, hey man, I care about you, I'm worried about where you're going, I'm worried about some of the things that you're doing, can we talk through this? Yet it seems that he had let people in to speak into his life and influence him, that not only negatively influenced his life, negatively influenced his family, but negatively influenced other people around him. The other thing David mentions, he doesn't just mention his position, but he also mentions his relationship with Saul. We'll see that in the next verse, verse 11. He says, "See my father. See my father. See the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverbs of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you." Man, I think you're just seeing something here, not only just about the character of David, and David wasn't a perfect person, but you're seeing something about something that was in David that I believe God's saying he wants to see in us and see in our lives as well. Where he's saying, hey, not only did David see the position that Saul had and honored him in that, but he saw the hopefulness, even though they weren't, remember, Saul was his father-in-law. And so, right, that's a weird Thanksgiving dinner when your father-in-law is hurling spears at you and trying to kill you. But he reminded his father-in-law of the relationship that they were supposed to have. He reminded him that there was hope for what this relationship could look like. He honors him and says, hey, Father, don't you remember who I am? I could have killed you, but I didn't. I could have operated like you did, but I didn't. And David chose obedience, even in the face of possible death. Even though he didn't know what the results were going to be, he still chose to honor Saul and be obedient. And that meant that he was going to have to continue serving under this unjust, unfair, wicked, sinful king. That meant he was going to have to continue to serve under Saul, who was operating in the position of king that was David's rightful position. And if we're being honest in the room right now, I think most of us would just be like, David, you should have just got back at him. That's what I would have done. Like, you should have just got him. You had his chance. It almost was like God gave him to you for you to get back at, for you to get everything back, for you to get your life back together. But instead of that, what we see David do is he engages Saul not only on the basis of his position, but on the basis of his relationship. He reminds him, hey, you're supposed to be a father to me. Students, I wonder what it would look like in our relationships, in the people that God has put around us, if we follow David's example here. That we prioritize relationships and honor over pride and preference, over power and position. I'm not saying we should ignore wrongdoing. I'm not saying we should ignore people who have hurt us, that we should act like it didn't happen. I'm saying we should acknowledge it fully and still choose to honor them in the midst of that. And can I tell you, that's not something that's easy. If you're someone in here who has been hurt, if you're someone in here who has been wronged, that is not an easy thing. And right here, I don't believe Jesus is asking us to do something easy. He's just simply asking us to be obedient. And in the midst of our obedience, I believe he can do something. We're calling our series the Upside Down Kingdom, the kingdom that God is trying to create. And in the Upside Down Kingdom, don't miss this, students, honor is greater than power. Honor is greater than power. Power and position can be given, and it can be taken away. It can be hard earned, and it can be easily obtained. But honor is a choice we have to make. Honor is something that we have to submit to. Honor is something that we have to do regardless of our circumstances. And what we see in David, that regardless of how the power was misused, even though David was deeply hurt, and can I tell you something? When you have to leave your family and your father-in-law is trying to kill you and you're on the run for years, I promise you, David was hurt. But David not only wanted a restored relationship with Saul, he wanted Saul to have a restored relationship with God. We see that in verse 15. He says, "May the Lord therefore be the judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my case and deliver me from your hand." As soon as David finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me with good, whereas I have repaid you with evil." And what we begin to see unfold in this story, this interaction between David and Saul, this interaction between father and son-in-law, this interaction between someone who has been treated unfairly by the person who was supposed to be trusted, who has been wronged by the person who was supposed to lead him. You see that David's honor in those moments is the thing that God used to change not only Saul's life, not only David's life, but the entire kingdom. It was a moment of restoration for Saul in his story. It was a moment that God used. David's simple act of honor was a moment that God used to change everything. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying you're just supposed to sit in bad environments. I'm not saying you're supposed to just sit in the midst of abuse or any type of wrongdoing to you by someone in a position of power and authority. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go get someone in a higher position of power and authority that you trust and let them know what's going on. But I'm just beginning to imagine what your family might look like if you chose honor. I am imagining what your relationships with your friends look like if you chose honor. I'm just imagining what your sports teams and your classrooms would look like if you chose honor. And here's what I believe can happen. A single act of honor holds more power than any position can give you. A single act of honor holds more power than any position can give you. Saul had the highest position in the kingdom, but David's simple act of honor, God used to change the entire kingdom. And David didn't have to wait till he rose up. David didn't have to wait till he became the king. David didn't have to wait till he had more power. All he had to do was be obedient right where he was at and choose honor. It's not the easy thing, students, but it's the obedient thing. He chose to lay down pride and preference. He chose to lay down the power and position that was already promised to him, and he simply chose to honor. And I believe, students, that God is wanting you to choose honor as well. One of my favorite verses in the book of Hebrews says, "Love one another with brotherly affection and outdo one another in showing honor." Man, I love that. Outdo one another in showing honor. The author of Hebrews is writing in this moment to what the relationships between believers should look like, what the relationship between husbands and wives should look like. And he's saying, hey, you should love each other in a way that you are outdoing one another in honor. Almost like it's a competition. And for me, it helps me picture tennis. I'm not sure if any of you are tennis players, but I just think of this outdoing in honor, that someone is taking the first step and they're gonna serve honor. And that person on the other side, they're gonna be like, you're gonna honor me? Not today, I'm gonna honor you back. And you're like, no. And that there would be this back and forth of honoring that God is going to use, and he is going to bless your relationships, and he is going to change your families, and he is going to change your friends if you would simply choose honor. But someone has to serve first, students. And when it comes to choosing honor, students, I don't want you to miss this. Choosing honor has more to do with who you want to be rather than what someone else is doing. Choosing honor has more to do with who you want to be rather than what someone else is doing. And so And when you are in the midst of a situation with someone in position of authority and you disagree with them and you don't trust you, you find yourself being wronged, what would it look like for you to serve honor first? Regardless of other actions in your family, what would it look like for you to serve honor first? Students, what could it change for you and your families and your friends for you to adopt a lifestyle where instead of reacting to what everyone else is doing around you and paying back evil for evil, you chose to be like David and choose honor? And in the midst of that, I think we can be encouraged to show grace in the midst of that. Remember that other people are people too. We are not perfect. If you remember last week, we talked about the person that Jesus wanted us to be. He wanted us to be meek, to be lowly, to recognize that we are sinful and broken. And if we recognize that we are sinful and broken, we know that is the grace of God in our lives, that we are not operating in an unjust way like the other people around us. And what I've learned in my life as I've learned people's stories that hurt people. And most of the time, if you begin to learn someone's story and maybe choosing honor is the avenue that they open up to you, some of the things they do begin to make sense. Man, I want to be very clear, that doesn't make it right. That doesn't excuse it. What they do might still be wrong. But maybe you have a better understanding of them and what they went through, and that it might make sense and you can show grace and still choose honor. Because in God's kingdom, honor is greater than power, and He's given you the ability to choose honor first. Pray with me. God, we're thankful that you challenge us with hard things. You don't just give us the easy way out. You call us to a higher level, a higher standard. Because those are the moments that you choose to change our lives. Those are the moments that you choose to change our families. Those are the moments that you choose to change our friends. And those are the moments that you get the glory. And that's what we are praying for in our lives. That as we begin to act differently and look like Jesus has called us to, that the people around us see that and they want you in their lives as well. Help us when it's not easy. Help us when it's difficult. Help us when we're hurt. But God, help us be obedient to choose honor first in the midst of all of that. We love you. We trust you in Jesus' name. Amen.